There are sometimes these fun topics in history, which, especially the history which gets closer to the current day, where it almost gets humorous. You see, if I was talking to you in the 1990s about the Chinese Navy and its destroyers, you'd be probably wondering why I bothered. Because you'd be looking and go, they have barely any, they're mostly small, they're mostly Soviet derivatives, they are nothing. And honestly, the Chinese Navy in the 1990s was noisy, smelly, and as hard as the crews worked, they weren't getting any more funding, and probably less funding than the Pigeon Reserve, if Beijing had one. Quite literally, the People's Liberation Army Navy, as it's called by most Western nations' translations of its name, at that time was not the third service or even the fourth service, probably about the fifth or sixth service in China. It really wasn't anything to write home about. The crews try their best. Please, I do not want to be considered to be dissing the crews, but they are low down the funding criteria, and the equipment they're getting is not even the best that China could really deliver to it. And a good example of this is the Yellow Sea incident in 1994, where there is a hand-class boat. It's one of their first-generation nuclear attack submarines. But it could have been this one, it could have been 405, which is the last of them. Basically gets involved in a scenario with the USS Kitty Hawk and her battle group. And when we talk about the hand class, or the Type 091s, you have to remember the first one is launched in 1970, the last is launched in 1990, and they built 5 in that time. The Chinese Navy was getting very low priority amongst the Chinese system, and I'm sure there are probably going to be people being very upset with me in the chat at this precise time, but they were, okay? They just were. They were not a priority, and they weren't getting the funding. And in this incident, a submarine is trying to, how should I say, trying to stalk a carrier battle group. It's so noisy, though, that it is seen and heard a long, long way away. In fact, they were roughly 450 miles from the carrier when the S-3B Vikings, the long-range fixed-wing ASW aircraft that were carried by US carriers at the time, the loss of which is one of the big things I find annoying about the modern carrier battle group on the MES, but leave that to one side. They were a really useful asset. Spotted it. When it was about 200 miles from the battle group, they were keeping track on it. And at that point, when it's 200 miles away, they start dropping sonar buoys. They start using their magnetic anomaly detectors. They start using everything they can to explain to it that it's not only been spotted, it has been spotted and has been localized, and they know exactly where its frigating is. And to try and prevent it and allow it to more freedom of maneuver, their commanders of the North Sea Fleet at the time, Wang Jing, scrambled 2 sets of 3 J6 Farmers, which were the domestic-produced version of the MiG-19. Yes, this is 1994, and this is what the People's Liberation Army Navy had to deploy, and this is one of their very few submarines they had available at the time. And the J6s tried to force away the Vikings, and they lost. There is an actual discussion that the pilots, the fighter pilots on the Kitty Hawk, were slightly disappointed, because they didn't have, by the time they got there to try and help out the Vikings, to try and go, hello, you want to mess with our ASW aircraft, the Vikings themselves had already dealt with the threat. had already managed to deal with any issues it might presume. And honestly, I would say 1994 is a bit of a low point for the People's Liberation Army Navy. But the thing is, from this rather low point at the end of the Cold War, now we are talking about one of the world's, not just one of the world's most professional navies, because they were very professional at this point. They just didn't have the equipment. They were very focused on being professional. They just did not have the equipment. It's a very, very different world now. And this video is about how they got there, because realistically, when you talk about Chinese naval power and projection, you're not talking about their submarine force, although that's grown a lot better and a lot bigger, and they are producing a lot more of them. You're talking about their destroyer force. That is how they project power on the surface. That is how they show their status. That is how they show best their evolution. It is the destroyers of the Chinese Navy. And so that's what this video is about. And this is why it makes it a really good video to do for the year of the destroyer, because this is quite recent history. But it goes right up to current day. And it is how they get from roughly 17 Type 51s of this type, which are, honestly, they are a evolved Soviet World War II design that's basically had the torpedoes taken out and missile tubes put in. And yeah, that was their destroyer force. To nowadays, 49 domestically built destroyers in service. Ranging from the Type 52 Luhu class to the 8 Type 055 Renhai class. Technically, the Type 055s are cruisers. Technically, they're cruisers, I would argue. But the Chinese consider them destroyers. And of course, they do have 4 Sovremenys, which are vessels they bought when they were worried they didn't have enough firepower to deal with American carrier battle groups. We're talking about this the whole way through. But it's interesting to think where they start off with. It's interesting to think about the Type 51s, because the 051s and the 51 series, it represents to me their attempts to often include capabilities which they would like to have, but which they're not yet confident enough in themselves for. Let me explain that. When I'm looking at the Chinese development of their destroyers, and you'll see this as we go through, they're often trying to push for domestic construction, domestic creation, domestic systems, so they become self-sufficient. But every now and again, they'll almost look unsure of themselves. And they'll order something else, something which is Russian engine components or Ukrainian gas turbines. They'll order something which they can order from someone else to try and give themselves a different baseline. Now, what I do like about the Type 51s as well is, as weak as they were by the time they went out, let's be honest, these are not destroyers in the 1990s sense, they really aren't. But as weak as they are, a lot are being preserved. And this is another thing which the Chinese have done to build up their naval power. They have started preserving ships. They have started putting museums of ships and various spaces around the country to demonstrate naval power locally, to give people a chance to go and touch it, to see it, to have a reason to embrace and understand it. And why is China doing this? Because if you consider nations which are dependent upon global trade, if you consider nations which are dependent on economically on the sea lines of communication working, there is none more so than China. The entire belt, projects, the entire sort of, trying to build roads and railway systems which will provide them with a landward route to Europe and various other places, are entirely a methodology of trying to provide a smidgen of insurance against losing access to the sea lines of communication. A smidgen of insurance. Because let's be honest, the volume of trade those things can carry versus the sea lines of communication, it might as well not be there. But the thing is, in the 1990s, in this period, China had only just started to emerge from its economic chrysalis. It had only just started to come out and start to become what it would become today. The big manufacturing hub of the world. And it's as it's grown, that manufacturing, as it's grown, it's dependent upon importing raw materials, exporting manufactured goods, kind of like another nation did in its past. The importance of its navy has grown massively, and so has investment in its navy. If you look at history, similar story happens with Germany and the building, construction, and justification for the Kaiserliche Marine. It's to an extent similar with why the Royal Navy is maintained at the level it is by Britain throughout most of the 19th and 20th large chunks of the 20th century. And even America. It's once you start being part of the global economic system and start buying into it and depending upon it for your economy, for parts of your economy to move, for currency, for fluidity, for all those things which help grease the wheels of modern economy, you start building up your naval capabilities. These are the Type 51s. In many ways, they are a defensive asset. What they are about is providing capabilities to try and keep people at a distance from the Chinese coast. But realistically, them and the poor Type 91 submarines were more gestures in that direction than actual capabilities. The Chinese SSK fleet, now that was a lot better in terms of funding capability, but still, it's not enough. But, interesting enough, at the point in the nadir, at the point of 1994, when we're talking about when that all happens, these are entering service, the Type 52s. Now, they are not what you consider the modern Type 52. Okay, please note, the modern Type 52 that you talk about these days will be the Type 52D stretch. We'll get onto that. That's one of the slides right at the end of this video. But this is the genesis moment for the Type 52. The genesis moment for something bigger, something more capable, something more general purpose. And this is it. And these vessels, they're still in service. Ordered in 1985, they were appropriately delayed, according to some sources, by orders for Thailand. In an export-focused economy, it kind of makes sense. They are Harbin and Qingdao. Qingdao, of course, is the modern naming for Tsingtao, which was the place where, in January 1939 and a few other times in history, the Royal Navy and the IJN had faced off against each other over the SS St. Paul. It's one of those almost moments where World War II almost breaks out in January 1939 between Britain and Japan, and potential changes of history. And why am I bringing that in here? Well, because here the naming is again for a vessel, and it is another changing in history. Now, admittedly, the vessel pictured is the Harbin, not the Qingdao. But they are pretty darn capable vessels. They have a landing platform and a hangar for helicopters. When we consider the Type 51 previously, nothing. Nothing at all. This has it. These have it. Originally, their quarterdecks were built open but enclosed in a 2010 refit. These ships are pretty much the starting point of the modern Chinese Navy. They're at a point at which they're going, okay, we need to build something capable ourselves, and we can't depend upon others for it. We have to build it ourselves, and this includes things like the missile systems. Now, what's interesting to me is that they are normally regarded as being fitted with the YJ-83 anti-ship missile. Technically, that missile doesn't come into service till 1998. 4 years. 4 years after they've ended service. So probably it's, I would say probably it's the YJ-8. Probably it's the YJ-8 they have initially fitted with. But I think they are quite quickly upgraded to the 83. Because that missile represents a level of assurity which, honestly, the Chinese were looking for. It's a pretty good system. It's a pretty reliable system. I would often describe it myself as Chinese Harpoon, realistically, in terms of how ubiquitously it's deployed and how it's used. Basically, they fit them to everything, they use them for everything, and they think about them for everything. But it makes sense, again, and it's a capability. It's bringing in something which allows this ship to be able to engage with likely threats. It's the same with the HQ-7, which is a fairly decent surface-to-air missile system. It is a fairly decent one. It is theoretically reverse-engineered from the French Crocodile system, but I would say it's reverse-engineered in a way that you need to build your own versions of the ground technologies which go into it. So, let me put it this way. There are two methods of reverse engineering. There's reverse engineering where you can copy everything, and you copy everything slavishly. You can do that if you have a similar enough research base, a similar enough industrial base, and a similar enough lexicon. The trouble is for the Chinese, and they find themselves doing this quite often, is that when they get access, and they are very sensible in using this, by the way, if you find yourself in a situation where you are behind technologically, and you can find ways to shave years of research and development, years, by accessing your opponent's information, that helps. But the thing is, your own research and development system will be on a different track and will be in different developments than necessarily they will be. So, there are two ways of reverse engineering, as I said. There's the slavishly copying it, and there's the interpreting it. Now, believe it or not, interpreting it has a long history. The Romans interpreted Carthaginian ship design, which of course they'd inherited from the Phoenicians. The British tended to interpret quite a lot of the French design during the Napoleonic Wars, and we look at them and go, that's a mathematically beautiful ship. Yes, it's beautiful lines, yes. Not quite how we'd like to design a ship, because we need to do various different things with it, but we can work with it as a basis. Hence the 74. Good example. The French come up with it first and go, look, this beautiful design. The British go, make some tweaks, we can make that perfect for ourselves, and the 74 becomes ubiquitous with the Royal Navy. Also because they're very good at capturing them off the French as well, and using those, so at certain points the French are very useful allies, even when you're technically fighting against them. In this scenario, though, what the Chinese are doing is they are trying to build their own industrial base. At the same time as they are using others' technology and they're accessing it, they're trying to use it to improve their industrial base and grow their own capabilities. So yes, it is based on the Crocodile system. It is not a slavish copy of it. But it gives them a far better missile system than they would have otherwise been able to get at the time for their ships. Because, honestly, they haven't got the radars, they haven't got the command and control systems, they haven't got the things necessary to have a more powerful surface-to-air missile. Because, as we've talked about before, on this channel, it's all well and good having the weapon system. If you don't have the sensors and control system and personnel to control, utilize, and maintain it properly, it's a white elephant. It literally is. You need to have all those things built into it. It's a good ship. It's a good design. and allows them to start moving forward. Now, one of the other interesting things is, of course, they had the Harbin Z9 or Kamov K-27 as their helicopters. It's always interesting to see that they're choosing between those two, because one of those really has an ASW leading role. Let's be honest, the Kamov has a real ASW leading role. But the Z9 has a more general purpose role, I would argue. And it's interesting to me in that they're approaching helicopters is sort of kind of like the Royal Navy's approach, when I'm looking at it. Because the Royal Navy currently has the Lynx and the Merlin. Previously to that, it had the Lynx and the Sea King. That's a lighter helicopter and a heavier helicopter. And both can do the ASW role, but let's be honest, the medium helicopter, the heavier one, like the Sea King or the Merlin, is a primary ASW warfare beast. The Lynx is a more general purpose asset that can dealing with surface threats, can deal with all sorts of interesting problems, as well as probably hunt down submarines. But is maybe not as good in that role as the larger counterpart. This again fits the Chinese need. If they'd been slavishly copying either the Russian or the American model, they'd have probably tried to go for a one-size-fits-all solution. They weren't. They were looking at their own needs. And their own needs involved developing their own aircraft, their own helicopters, and growing their own helicopter capability. But also, it involved them thinking about what they needed the ships to do. And these ships were about presence. They were. And they still are. Though less so these days, because let's be honest, they are now older. And the Z9C, if you've ever seen it, well, it is a license-built version of the Dauphin, the Eurocopter AS-365. And it looks modern and gorgeous, especially for the 1990s. It is something which has real aerial presence as a helicopter and allows China to project itself as powerful and forward and capable. And that's what these ships were about. These ships were about announcing China is starting to invest in naval power. They're about growing capability, and they're about starting to invest in it. They're also for the Chinese Navy itself. They're about them showing Beijing that they can be useful, that they can be something which the nation can take pride in. And this leads us to the fleet structure. Now, the Chinese fleet structure is interesting because it's inherited from the Soviet communist fleet structure, but it has certainly had a Chinese evolution of that, and there is a very good reason for this. Whereas the Soviet Union had the Pacific Fleet, the Northern Fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, and the Baltic Fleet, and all four fleets had about as much to do with each other as a lemon has to do with a pickle, because they were just not able to really mutually support each other. There might be internal canals and those sort of things that can allow them to move some ships around, etc., but that's might as well not be there, for the effect it does operationally and strategically in helping them actually work together. The Chinese, in contrast, well, their northern fleet, their eastern fleet, and their southern fleet can all work with each other. They all border each other. They can all interact. They can all support each other and team up. This means, realistically, the Chinese are far more of a combined operations force, naval structure, than the Russians could ever hope to be. Now, this is a diagram courtesy of globalsecurity.org, and I haven't found a better one in years, so I still use it. It's a little bit old, but allows me to explain things like the Zhongdui, which is major command, flotilla fleet. It's the major formations usually, and that's Zhongdui with only Z, not Zhengdui. Zhengdi, which is when you're sort of the lower one of the squadron battalion. I'm going to expand this out so you can read it properly. And there won't be I might remember. I hopefully will remember to put in a link. I almost said there won't be a link. I'm hoping I remember to put in a link below in the description to the global security site with the details on it. But they do have some very good stuff there. Now, Luhai are the major units, basically destroyers, nuclear submarines, and speedboats, sort of the leading attacking craft at each level. So basically, each level of fleet is structured with the premier unit of that level in the Zidai, a senior unit, and the secondary unit is in a Dadai, and then the support ships are in the Zongdui, rather than the Zongdui. And then there are Duis, which are smaller units. When they send us a small unit, if you know anything about the Roman army, you'll have heard of the Vexillians, and that's formation. That's sort of the example. Dui are basically, they're usually ad hoc formations which are put together. They're usually things which are put together for various taskings. So these formations can each depend on sort of which ships are in them, what ships are available, what they are the for, and what they're structured around. But again, they can work together and can support each other. And this is where I would argue the real strength comes from in the Chinese. They might be separate fleets, administratively. But realistically, if you were trying to engage the Chinese coast in any way, shape or form, you will not find the East Sea Fleet and the South Sea Fleet and North Sea Fleet not cooperating. They'll be working together. This means, in many ways, the Navy headquarters for the Chinese Navy has always been far more of an operational headquarters than their Soviet counterpart was, and has had far more of a role in developing of doctrine and organization than their Soviet counterpart was. Quite simply because you need to coordinate multiple fleet operations. You need to, how do you bring these fleets together? How do you bring a formation together for nowadays a carrier battle group? How do you bring together the formation of working the submarines together, working the surface ships together? How do you deliver the force and effect? And again, it's something worth noting that if we're talking about the Chinese Navy of the 1990s, there was a lot of good green shoots, there were a lot of interesting ideas coming through, but there wasn't a lot of capability there to back it up. They've been growing the capability and they're developing the capability as time has gone on. So this is the point, again, I'm making about this video. It's important to think about things not as where they were, and not do a direct contrast and comparison with Britain or America or the navies of necessary of NATO, but to think about the Chinese in terms of where they've been and where they are now. They're growing. They've got a capability. They've got a mass. They've got skills. Have they got everything together? One of the things I find when I'm looking at this the structures and the organization out of their full structures, I would say they are very much still in their Bastion mindset. And I'm not sure, or rather, I've never been convinced by the Bastion mindset as being necessarily a good naval policy to follow. It looks good on paper. I will admit it looks good on paper, but to me, the essence of naval warfare is fluidity, it's mobility, it's adaptation, it's using the space and the freedoms of maneuver to your advantage. And I think any doctrine, any strategy which seeks to limit that, by its nature, let's be honest, a defensive bastion structure limits that. Yes, it's going to mean you're within, let's say, support of land positions and land missile batteries and those things, which is a good point to make in its favour. But it also limits you in terms of your concept of operations. I'd also say, though, that whilst the structures still very much reflect that, I don't necessarily think Chinese operations now still reflect that as much. I think they are moving forward, but they are moving in a different way. Not entirely, but they are. And you see this as different force structures are experimented with and deployed abroad, and around the world they go to many operations and exercises. And this is something which is coming through. Okay. So at the moment, this is still pretty much what the fleet's force structure still looks like. But I don't know if it will still look like this in 5-10 years' time. I think it will probably evolve. I really do. I think they'll probably still be using the same titles, because why change them? But yeah, I think it will evolve. That leads us to the Type 51B, which am I looking, Alex, that doesn't actually look much like the Type 51. Nope. No, you're right, it does look closer to the Type 52. But there is a reason. This is Ukrainian gas turbines. It's a Type 51. It's another, I would argue, insurance job in some ways, against their own developments, against things that are going on, against things that are developing. And this happens a lot in Chinese systems, because the idea is they're using an improved version of the hull design from the earlier Type 51, hence it's given the 51 designation. But it has been also given a development in terms of its weaponry. It is something which is designed in some ways to make use of a facility which they don't yet have that same viability. It is a CODOG. It is a CODOG that's combined diesel or gas, not diesel and gas. So they're not able to run simultaneously. They're taking alternate roles, like the Type 52s which preceded it. It uses Ukrainian engines. It's worthwhile remembering that I think it was 112, which was, of course, Harbin, which used General Electric gas turbines, American turbines. The Chinese at this point were still not getting good gas turbines, and they were using what they could get to try and build up their fleet. And before people start going, this seems strange, just remember, at the height of the Anglo-German naval race, prior to World War One, Parsons turbines, the British turbine manufacturer, were supplying pretty much all the turbines that were used by the German battlecruisers. And considering there was also a qualitative race going on at the time, which involved Britain, not Germany, America, Italy, and Japan. Germany wasn't part of the qualitative race because they couldn't afford to be. If they got, basically, they were always a step behind with the tech and upgrades, because they were in a budget fight with the army, and the army was winning for the German Navy, the Kaiserliche at the time. And that's eventually how Britain wins the naval race. They up the cost of warships so much that basically the army tells the Kaiserliche, the German army tells the Kaiserliche that they're not getting any more funding. Their funding is starting to stop the army being able to get all the artillery it needs. It's not going to work. They're not going to get the money. That's how you win a naval race. You find which part of the government costs more than the navy, and you make sure you up the cost to the point of the navy to the point at which that part of the government that's more politically important starts going, ouch. So the qualitative race didn't involve Germany, but there's an interesting fun thing. Brown and Curtiss worked together, the British and American companies, to make turbines. And Curtiss would come up with the original design. Then Brown in England would get it, and they would build the version in the UK. And they were always just slightly better. They were like a tuning company for them. And then occasionally Curtiss would buy back the one which we made by Brown and go, we want to know what you've taken, how you've taken our design and done this to it. And they just look at it and go, sods, everything was just that little bit tuned. And yeah, you have all sorts of fun going on with the qualitative race. It's quite traditional in naval history that nations, even when they've been racing each other or even threatening each other, as the Anglo-Germans were, German race was, have still been sharing technology. Because honestly, there are often limited engine suppliers, limited people who are supplying the things of the quality needed, and it makes a profit for someone. So this has been upgraded quite extensively in 2016. In fact, all these older ships were upgraded quite extensively in the teens of the 2000s. to give them a few more years' service. I think this was done in part to keep the fleet at maximum strength, but also because they didn't want to send some of the newer ships down to the roles which some of these vessels could do. And these ships are more likely to be used for supporting assets in the South China Sea, where they might, how do I put this, maybe have an accident ramming into things. It's something which you don't want to have damaged, but you really can afford more to be damaged than something which is really, really expensive. And the trouble is, new ships can get damaged. The Guilin, which is a Type 052D, I don't think it's is it stretched or is it not? It's a 2019 one, so it might be. It did get damaged in a recent exercise and operations, and then you're down a brand new destroyer. So if you can use your old destroyers for things, you should. And again, this is good precedence in history. It used to be quite common for navies. They would keep the older ships around for doing the presence mission, doing the forward mission, doing the sort of deploy missions where they are more exposed and they might get lost, or they might get overwhelmed, or they might get into accidents. But frankly, you could more afford to lose those than the new hotness. But the thing about this one I do love, and it's a solo member of its class, the Type 51B, is that she is quite literally the progenitor of what I would call the Chinese naval design style. The Shenzhen has become, I would say, the style from which the future Chinese destroyers seem to have evolved from. If we go back to these earlier designs, you'll see they're bitty, they're messy, they're fiddly, they've got a lot of things going on them. This is the starter of that cleaner look, which I would say the Chinese Navy is now known for in their design. They are very much known for their clean lines. It's a good ship. It's a useful ship. It's also had quite an active operation. It served as flagship for the South Sea Fleet. It made the first goodwill visit to Africa in 2000, took part in their first trip to Europe in 2001, and it was the first visit to Japan in 2007. It had a refit in 2004. It took part in the second anti-piracy task group in the Gulf in 2009, visited Pakistan and India on the way back, and, as I've already mentioned, 2014 to 2016 had a massive overhaul. It's had a very active career as being a statement piece for the Chinese government. And it was good for that. It was fitted out for that. One of the things of fitting out as a flagship is you tend to be fitted out with spaces which are suitable for carrying out diplomatic functions on a larger scale. Because, as a rule, a flagship is more likely to have to host foreign dignitaries and politicians. Whether you like them or not, they'll get aboard. Kind of like rats. You can't help them. They always want to get where the shiny flags are. But the point is, this ship has proved useful and capable. I would not claim it is armed with the most powerful systems. It has had its HQ-7 replaced post-2016 with a 32-cell HHQ-16 SAM system, which is definitely an improvement. And its YJ-83s were swapped in for YJ-12s, which is also an improvement. The YJ-12s are sort of coming in replacement for the 83s. Again, if I was going to give you something I was going to compare them to, it would actually be the Sunburn missile, which was fitted to Sovremenny. We're talking about something which is a good system. I'm not going to claim it isn't a good system. For its time and its capabilities, it is a good system, but it is a roughly just under 300 nautical mile range, somewhere between 2.5 to 4 times the speed of sound, 200 to 500 kilogram, that's quarter to half a ton warhead missile system. It's something which is capable, and it entered service in terms of its latest version when it was refitted onto the Type 51B and the Sovremenny class vessels, which are currently in the service with the People's Liberation Army Navy. So it is sort of a direct replacement for the Sunburn in the Plan 4 structure. And it's basically an improved Sunburn. It's a very much improved Sunburn, but it follows a very similar sort of fit in the whole strategic system. And again, to me, that makes sense for this ship. What is this ship's job? Is it to be a task group destroyer, or is it to be a destroyer which is somewhere in the South China Sea, which can deliver a heck of a punch should it need to? That's pretty much it. It's going to be with surface ship task groups in the South China Sea. It's not about carrier battle groups. This is about surface ship task groups. And that was very much still what the Chinese Navy were about at this point, when she came into service, and I would argue, even to an extent when she's getting her upgrades in 2016, they are still in that mindset. I'd say they're evolving now, considering how far and how hard they're going down the carrier battle group route. But that's what the mindset they were in. And that brings us to the Sovremenys as a good point of discussion. Now, these vessels were procured between 1999 and 2006 are a really interesting point for the People's Liberation Army Navy in this development. There are some who took it as a sign that the Chinese were regressing back to their previous history of just buying Russian. And it was an interesting discussion to be in at the time. It really was. I was a young man involved in discussions online and where they were going on, because it was the first starting point of really there being discussions online and a lot of these discussions and message boards going up. Because you have to remember, in 2005, well, I had just gone to university. I was at my first year of my bachelor's. And honestly, I remember being in a Facebook group discussing this one. And everyone's going, oh yes, the Chinese, they've given up, they're already buying back Russia. And I was thinking, no. What they're doing is they're buying a backstop. They're buying something they know works, and they're happy works. And they're making sure they have that in service before they push themselves off, so they can afford to take a risk. And that was the thing. I saw these ships as the Chinese buying the ability to take a risk from a place of safety. They weren't regressing. They weren't going to the Russians wanting ideas and going to base their future ship designs off what they were building. No. They were looking at these ships and going, we need something that can help us kill carriers. We need something on the books now that's a threat. Because look what happened in 1994. Look what happened in 1994. Look what happened in the LSC. We were bullied. We had no surface ships we could send that could even have a hope of getting involved to help the submarine out. We didn't have any aircraft. We had nothing. We don't want to be embarrassed like that again. We don't. And this was not just the Navy saying this. This was China as a nation saying this. They needed strength, and they needed it yesterday. So what do? You buy the destroyer, which is probably one of the most focused surface killing assets in the world. You couldn't get an Udaloy because even the Russians are still paranoid today about their ASW fit, which is an improvement over the submarines. I do admit it's an improvement. It's a far bigger unit. It's basically similar to some of their cruiser units put in a destroyer hull. But the submarines are still good. Still good for tag team with an Udaloy, but still good on their own. They've still got quite a reasonable fit and reasonable capability, and they are very useful for the anti-surface role. And having 4 of them, well, that's really kind of useful. Because that means those 4 vessels, they operate as part of the Eastern Fleet, the fleet which faces Taiwan, which faces Japan, which faces the Pacific. The fleet which has to focus on the likelihood of threats coming from the Pacific. The likelihood of potential threats. Even in a time of peace, you should prepare for war to maintain that peace. After all, which is cheaper, deterrence or war? When is war more likely? When you are strong or when you are weak? Well, if we consider it from the other side perspective, in the 1990s, when the Cold War ended, there was a belief amongst some Western nations that history had ended, that war had ended, that they were now so strong compared to the rest of the world that no one would ever dare start a war with them, and therefore there would be peace or more, or they could choose whether to get involved in the war or not. They believed that was going to be a self-perpetuating technological advantage that meant they could save money and not invest in armed forces. They could constantly live off a peace dividend that would keep on giving, that would keep on allowing them to cut and cut and cut. We're not talking about that now in the West, are we? That's not a thing anymore. That's not something you hear politicians or journalists or anyone saying in discussions. It's now, there's a lot of fear of war because people feel weak. If you feel strong, you think you have the choice about whether to start war, and often you choose not to, because actually having a war rather than negotiation puts way too much in the hands of chance. So this was about buying strength immediately that would allow them to continue the developments and the iterations, because let's be honest, what have they built? They built 1 of these, they built 2 of these, they had 17 of these. They've not quite moved on yet, have they? And now it's the Shameless book plug. This is part of the video where I say thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Shamelessly plug my book on destroyers. These are Royal Navy destroyers, Genesis Modern Destroyer, run up to World War II, and during and after World War II, did Tribal, Battle and Daring class large fleet destroyers. There are more books coming out this year. I currently have a lot of building work going on, and every time I seem to set aside a day for editing at the moment, a plumber or an electrician finds a way to destroy either a pipe or a power cable, and I end up being involved in fixing that. At some point, when I'm finished and happy with the editing of the books, and they are as good as I want them to be, they will start coming out. But at the moment, my perfectionism is warring with every tradesman I can find. They're good tradesmen. It's just this house. Unfortunately, this house, which is a lovely house, was at one point owned by a tradesman who did a lot of the work himself. And that means a lot of interesting things. But I have been asked a couple of questions about how this channel is supported and how this channel how the questions for things like Thursday night videos are done. So here it is. This channel basically runs as, instead of me having to go for research grants or those sort of things which normally academics do for their research funding, I run a YouTube channel. And I'm happy to do these videos to all these topics and talks. And there's the other things that carry on, and in turn the funding that comes in goes and funds my research. So instead of me having to go to grant bodies or any organizations like that and go, yes, I will fit with your requirements to publish in this journal or that, in that way I use that methodology, I can just do what I like research-wise. I can buy the books I want to, I can go to the archives I want to, I can choose to publish as a book, as a video, as a journal article, thanks to you and your support. Now, the primary ways that comes in through are memberships in the YouTube channel. There is also advertising revenue, but mainly I do the advertising I do because I'm not a big enough channel yet that the algorithm will automatically promote me even if I do not have advertising enabled. And frankly, I think it's becoming tighter and tighter that if you don't have the advertising turned on, the algorithm is not helping you. I'm sorry, YouTube, you might claim that's not the case, but I certainly think it probably is. The other main source of income, in fact, for the research, the largest source of income is Patreon. And what happens on Patreon is, you might notice there's 2 Thursday videos, and there are 4 premieres usually a month, which are patrons topics. Now, 2 of those the 2 patron lives are voted, the highest voting from patron vote. So patrons have suggested all the topics. I then put them into this, and then they are voted for by the patrons, and it's a multiple choice. So every patron can submit as many ideas as they want. I'll put 25 best forward, and then every patron can vote for as many of those as they like. So it's the ones which get the most votes overall. Most people go, "Oh, I'd quite like to see that." That we actually do. The 2 of the highest votes become lives, and then some that are along the line will become premieres, usually a few months later, because they'll just go into the schedule, and there's usually about 4 lives a month that then get turned into it. But there's 2 extra premieres added each month, and those 2 extra premieres are the 3rd and 4th. So, for example, currently for April, and April's vote is live at this precise time. It's live till there's 6 days left. I have selected of which are the ones which are actually in the lead amount. Please note, my votes have not put them in the lead. I have just literally selected them so I could find them quickly in this discussion. With 20 votes in pole position, number 1 front, is Rick Vassar's Alternate History. France falls in World War II, but the French Navy decides to stay and fight with the British. How does this affect the war? I'm presuming to believe that's the whole fleet, the ones in Alexandria, the ones in North Africa, etc. So that'll be an interesting alternate history to work through. We also have on 11, but currently there are 2 sitting on 10. Paul Harvey, Alternate Future. AUKUS is expanded to cover a new destroyer. What would suit the needs of all 3 nations? So basically designing a Burke successor, Type 45, successor to Type 83, and something for the Australians. I think I'm tempted to add in the Japanese to that as well, because I think if you put all 4 together, you could get a real... There's a lot of things which fit in. I think also how I'd work it would be different than how they would historically work it, because my idea has always been that actually what we should work together on is on the systems, as in the sensors, the missile systems, the VLS, those systems, and then leave the actual hull and engines to the individual nations to decide and build as they wish. So if you want to build a larger ship with more missiles, you can. But because the expensive bits, let's be honest, are not the hull and engines. The expensive bits are the VLS, the missiles, and the command and control systems and the sensors. They're the expensive bits to research. But I'll get into that in the video. And then on 10, we've got Lions, Alternate History. After the Falklands War, the Royal Navy procure, very strict manner, Standflex. How does it affect design? Oh, that could be interesting. Standflex in the Royal Navy. Going Danish long before the Type 31s. Could be interesting. That could be a lot of flexibility, especially as that would go straight into the Type 23s. They'd probably be the first ones to be actually realistically massively impacted by it. And that could have a very interesting impact on the Type 23 class if they've got Standflex added in. Because they were already quite a flexible light frigate design, but with Standflex added in, they actually might have got some of the things they were fitted for, but not with. And PDP 11, Alternate History. Due to the sacrifice of blood, the UK and Japan refused to abandon their alliance of Washington Naval Treaty. What's the impact? Ooh. Well, that would probably stop the Washington Naval Treaty, because if Britain and Japan don't... There's 2 options I can go down. I probably will do both in the Alternate History. I'll do examination of both. There's the one they go down where the treaty doesn't exist because they refuse to sacrifice their alliance, and there's the one where they officially sacrifice their alliance but keep it going unofficially. It's an interesting set of topics, but those are the current 4 winners. But 4 at the front. They're not winners, they're at the front. But there are others in here, and there are plenty of people left to vote. There's only been 142 votes cast. There's a lot more people who can go in and cast their votes, and the whole thing could completely change. But that is how this channel is funded and how this channel is supported. It's all by you. So, yeah, there's the book, and on with the Chinese Navy destroyers, I think. Now, the Type 52Bs are a bit of a regression. but they're aggression in a sensible way. And if you look at them, you might go, hang on, they look similar to something. You might think, that doesn't look like a Chinese-style destroyer at this point, and realistically, it doesn't. It has lines which are coming from somewhere else to an extent. There's a reason for having lines coming from somewhere else. This is an Admiral Gorshkov class frigate. And the reason is that this uses a Russian SAM system, the Buck SAN-12, or Still. And this was about bringing in air defense capability to their fleet. This was also, I would argue again, about providing them with security for what they were planning on doing next. Because the Chinese are following a very iterative design process. They're following something which is very much about setting up and setting the scene for what their next stage was going to be. They wanted a ship which brought capabilities that were allowing them to grow their ability to operate further and further away from the support of land-based air cover. That were going to allow their task groups to be more and more independent. And again, this builds on, as we've already discussed prior to the Shameless book plug, the Sovremenny. It builds on the Type 51B and the Shenzhen. It builds on, well, most with the fleet structure, but it builds on specifically, the Type 52s. It's building on their stylings, on their capabilities, on their growth, on things that have come through, and it's about enhancing a force which is still majoritively made up of these. The Type 51s, 051s, built from 1968 to 1991. But let's think about that. They have gone from building these all the way through, and now they're building these, the Type 52Bs. And the thing is, they're not just building these, because they laid these down in 2001. The first one, Guangzhou is launched in May 2002, Wuhan in September 2002. They're commissioned in July and December 2004. And whilst they're being built, and they're coming along, they've also got, again with Russian air defense missiles and Russian systems, they've got the Type 52C, which is really coming up as the ship which is coming. Now, the one thing I would say, the ships, it looks more like, as I said, the Gorshkov, the sort of frigates than the Chinese-style destroyer. This is an evolution of that earlier design. It's an evolution, and it's going towards the Chinese destroyer. It's the Burkeization, to extent, of the Chinese destroyer, with the flat panel arrays and all these things. And that makes sense because it's also where the Chinese are pushing themselves. Okay? These ships, which are started construction in 2002, the Type 52Cs. So, the Type 52B is started construction in 2001. There's also a Type 51C, which is started construction in 2003. Type 52C. So, these are the Chinese through and through design. Whereas there had been something of the Gorshkov about the previous ones. And literally that was something because of, we're using a similar system, so we're going to be designed in a similar methodology around a similar, with similar parameters, so that's why we started to look similar. Literally, it's weapon systems which dictate shape. The reason why these start to look like Burke, and I can make a joke about being a sort of like Burke, is they've got flat panel arrays, and those flat panel arrays have similar tensile positionings on the structure of the hull, which mean you're going to end up with a similar style shaping to give those arrays the best chance of performance. It's a fun system. Now, the thing is, as well as having a lovely, and it is a lovely, ASA array, active electrically scanned array, as is the Type 346, which are those flat panels, it also is carrying 48 HHQ-9 surface-to-air missiles. Now, these are basically China's interpretation of the S-300, applied courtesy with some purchases from Israel and Germany, with potentially some interesting advancements from Patriot missile systems. And given all the spin, as said, of Chinese technological background and Chinese development. They do come with the revolver VLS system, which you have to love. Almost every country which has received them has gone, we'd really like to not have these revolvers because they are engineeringly a wonderful design. If you're looking for an engineeringly efficient and wonderful design, you want the revolver system. If you want the system designed from the perspective of the people actually having to maintain it, you do not want the revolver system. That's it. Literally, the reason the revolver system isn't copied more is because, quite simple, it's just annoying. And they come with 2 of the Type 730 close-in weapon systems, so 2 goalkeepers. Again, I would say this is a cost engineering approach, a cost efficiency engineering approach, rather than someone who's actually done a lot of study of warfare. There again, pretty much everyone in the world has done the same thing, so I can't really blame the Chinese for this. It's just a personal bugbear. See, the lesson of every war, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, Falklands War, every significant naval war which has had significant naval operations involved, has led to the ships becoming more and more festooned in light weapons to deal with the threat, to help manage the threat envelope and deal with anything which manages to get through the far heavier outer air defences and actually leaks through. And as a rule, my point is this: if you only have 2 of these close-in weapon systems and something gets through to the point at which they need to engage them, if one of them is broken for some reason, you've only got 1 to cover you, and you've got, in this formation, 90 degrees not covered properly, at least. Probably a little bit more than 90 degrees, possibly as close as 120, but we'll leave that to one side. If you've got 3 of them, and 1 goes down, then you are probably reduced down to a very narrow 90, or maybe even just about 60 degrees, which isn't covered. If you have 4, and 1 goes down, well, you've still got full 360 degree coverage. And if you consider the cost of one of these close-in weapon systems, which basically is a Chinese version of a Dutch goalkeeper, and before anyone tries to say it's not, have a look at the Dutch goalkeeper and have a look at the Type 730. And you tell me if someone didn't look at the Dutch goalkeeper and go, that's a really good idea, I think we can make something which works similarly, if not better. Mainly because they've kept developing it for a lot longer. We'll see. It's a useful system. They also carry a single helicopter, which is why they have, but they have a sort of weird off-center hangar. If you notice, they have a flight deck control system on the far side here. They have the hangar door here, and then they have this space in the superstructure, in the hangar space. Now, that could be stores, that could be space for another hangar, that could be, who knows what they're doing in there, but that is an interesting design point to consider, because normally you'd be expecting a slightly wider, at least a wider door profile, especially if you are not putting it in the center of the deck, but you know, that's what they've done. That's how they've arranged it. I would say these are really setting the mold. Now, 2 are commissioned in 2004 and 2005. The rest, that is, the remaining 4, enter service between 2013 to 2015. So basically what they're doing at this point is they build 2 on Type 52s. They build 2 of Type 52Cs, 2 Type 52Bs, and also armed with the S300, actually armed with the S300, and I do really mean this, they have the Type 51Cs. They have 2 of these. And these have no hangar. They literally just have space to flight deck for a Ka-28. This is very close to a Sovremenny in many regards. And carry a load of YJ-83 anti-ship missiles, have their 2 Type 730s, have their torpedoes, But yeah, these are very much S-300 ships in terms of Russian S-300 with Russian-style radars, etc. systems as they're built. And to my mind, they are building all these ships. These are laid down in 2003, launched 2004, 2005, and commissioned 2006, 2007. It's basically a test. The first two of these go to the South Sea Fleet. These two go to the North Sea Fleet. The 52Bs go to the South Sea Fleet. And all of them are being tested. And they decide to build 4 more of these. And basically with this generation, this is very much, I think, China going, okay, so have our systems come of age? Have we got something we can run on? Have we got something we can build on? Have we got something we can utilize? And they can. The 52C goes, yep, I'm good. You can start working on me. You can start evolving from me. And this is important. This is really, really important. Because 52C is going to become the model for which all the future destroyers are going to come from. And you can see her linings and designings and superstructure profile especially comes not from the 52 line, more from the 51B line. But this is the point. They have reached this level. And these ships, these are going to be the basis for the future. They're also going to be the basis for what happens next in terms of evolution. And that's something that's worthwhile considering. The Chinese Navy has gone through various evolutions. When we are talking about at the beginning, we're very much a bastion defense navy. This was very much a bastion Cold War bastion defense navy. That was its issue. This is about expanding to the perimeter of the bastion, growing the perimeter of the bastion. That's what these ships are doing. They are providing the capability to project further out to the bastion, maybe do some diplomacy around the world, maybe show your presence. You're growing into a great power, start acting like it. These are about securing your position, giving you some capability, some firepower. The 52B, the 52C, and the 51C are about preparing for the next level of development and evolution. These ships, all these 3 classes of ships, are about testing ideas about what comes next and about showing what comes next. So what comes next is going to become the biggest sea change for the Chinese Navy. Because this is the moment when they start to go on from being a surface action force, which supports submarines and aircraft in trying to defend the area, to being a sea control force. And that is carriers. And please note, I did not say offensive or expeditionary, I said sea control force. And this is very much what the Chinese Navy are moving towards. They're moving their task groups, their organization, everything around to sea control. Because if you can control the sea, you can use the sea. If you can use the sea, you can succeed. You can carry out operations, you can operate, you can maneuver forces, land forces as you wish, as you will. But you need to control the sea to be able to do that. Now, expeditionary force is about being able to seize control of other seas. I don't think the Chinese are currently at that kind of philosophical level. They're still about controlling the seas around them, realistically. Yes, they want to project power occasionally, but as a routine, they want to control their own seas. And that's what these task groups are about. And the Liaoning is why there are 4 more of these ordered. Because when you want to escort her, especially when you see the earlier task group photos, quite often there is a Type 52C, usually a couple of them, sitting right next to her, going, yeah. Will what they rely on to protect this This is the ship which matters in our fleet. This is the ship which matters for the fleet and our developmental fleet, and we're here to protect it. Commissioning 2012. Not that long before, well, Shangchun and Zhengzhou commission in 2013, and then of course there's Xi'an in 2014 and Xi'an in 2015 of the Type 52Cs. Liang is basically the Chinese Navy going, okay, so if we want to control the waters around us, we need to be able to project power right to the edge of those areas we wish to control. If we want defense in depth at sea, because it is our strategic depth, we need to be able to project full power within that area. Which means we need carriers for the outer air group and the outer air attack. It's a capability which provides their fleets with an extra punch. It also is a very real thing for aircraft carriers as a methodology of dealing with the supply issue and the resupply at sea issue. Now, the resupply at sea issue is VLS systems. Swing arm systems, you could actually resupply at sea. You could do replenishment at sea and you could reload, because it went down into a magazine and you could have systems for getting missiles into that magazine. But VLS systems come as a unit. They come in that little VLS pod, so you have to take out the spent VLS tube from the system. The vertical launch system has tubes which contain the missiles, and you have to take out the spent one, move that, either chuck it over the side, which is going to be expensive because you can keep making them, or send it back to be reconditioned, and then reload it. And you have to do that at sea. And that's difficult. That's so difficult that pretty much everyone is having nightmares about this. Everyone's trying to suddenly thinking, hang on, if we actually have to fight wars which are actually proper wars, we're going to have to work out how to deal with this issue. We haven't been even experimenting realistically with it properly since the end of the Cold War. Oh my, what are we going to do? Well, for many navies, the easy way to try and get round it at least a little bit was to have an aircraft carrier. Why? Because you can replenish DATS magazines at sea, which means you can have fighter aircraft going up with air-to-air missiles and anti-surface missiles, and you can replenish those at sea. So your outer air defense and your outer strike capabilities are replenishable at sea, which reduces the burden built on your destroyers and your things carrying their missiles in vertical launch systems. It provides you that capability to operate just that bit further out for that bit longer before you have to return home and basically get pierside for cranes to start restocking your VLS, because that's the quickest and easiest way to do it. Now, I do think people will eventually figure these systems out. Myself, I've seen a very good design recently which involved pretty much rail tracks on either side of the VLS system, and basically a gantry system which could flow across it, which folded into the deck when it wasn't in use but popped out when it was in use, and literally would literally pick up the spent VLS tube, put that behind the VLS system, and then go and pick up this new VLS from where they've been roused to. And there are ideas about having systems which the replenishment ships will themselves drop off, which will do that. I'm not sure that's a good idea, to have a system which you have to first replenish you with the VLS loading system. Then you have to reload. Then you have to send the VLS, it has to remove a spent VLS, send that back to me, and I send you a new tube, and just keep doing that. And then I have to retrieve the system from you. That's making it very, very complicated to be doing at sea. And it's also adding time to it and making this replenishment take longer than it necessarily should do. Whereas if you have a system built into each of the ships and into each of the VLS systems which are being utilized, you could A, be reloading multiple VLS systems at the same time, and B, doing that to multiple ships at the same time, and C, you can I can send you all the new VLS tubes you need. I can hang around, and while doing it, I can try and take off the spent ones. You could already stack the spent ones before I even come alongside, so you can speed up the process. And then I can move on as a replenishment ship to replenish other ships while you're still reloading yourself. That seems like a more sensible idea to be following, but we'll see which way they go. But either way, the Liang comes in, and suddenly you're operating in task groups. And suddenly you're starting to have to think about task group operations and the needs of task group operations. And the fact is that being such a task group makes you more of a target. Because you're higher value, so more people are going to be gunning for you. Okay, you're more powerful, you're more able to defend yourself, but you're also a bigger, you're also a more important target, more valuable targets for the enemy to come after. It's the swings and roundabouts of conflict. And so this is what drives the next generation development. The fact they're thinking about task groups. They're thinking about task groups and surface action groups. They're thinking about global. They're thinking about, to an extent, also more of an increased presence mission. The Belt and Road initiatives that, as I've talked about already, about trying to provide extra support in case the maritime routes get interceded. It becomes more important to establish a presence floating around them. Hence the need for larger ships and more ships. So pretty much, yeah, these have come in, and unsurprisingly, what comes next? Well, what comes next is we've got the 52s, these. They are lovely. But we really do not like that revolver VLS system, and we want to improve things. And so they do. And so comes the 52D. And please note, I have broken this up into the 52D and the 52DL. So before someone says there's more than 13 in service, I know there is. But this is about the 52D. We're going to be talking about the 55s and the 52DLs. Okay? We're going to be treating them because each one represents a different point in the development. So, bear with me. I have broken up the Type 52s because it's kind of like the Arleigh Burke. Okay? So going on with the in terms of the Chinese Navy, in that the Type 52D is their equivalent of the Burke. It's wonderful. It does pretty much anything to a great degree. We are now building it. The big interesting thing is going to be if we can ever break out from building it. If we can ever evolve past building this wonderful system. I have faith they can. Just like I have faith the US Navy can eventually find a successor to the Burke, which isn't another Burke. Or actually might well be named Arleigh Burke, because by the time Arleigh Burke might have been out of service long enough that they actually do name the next class the Arleigh Burkes. We'll leave that to one side. Could be a way to get around Congress. But the point is, this is it for the Chinese Navy. This is their Burke. This is their Burke Mountain they are going to keep returning to, and they're going to keep on building. Because it is just enough of every capability you need. Now, the first thing you have to realize about Chinese task groups is that often, in real terms, they have more ships in them than American and certainly British task groups might have in them for the carrier battle groups in terms of escorts. Now, theoretically, the British and American groups will have the same number of ships, but they'll often be dual-hatting and off doing other jobs. The Chinese are less likely. They don't not do that, but they are a lot less likely to be doing that. Usually, if these ships are assigned to this carrier battle group, they are with that carrier battle group. They're not off doing a diplomatic visit several hundred miles away. They're not off doing a port call several hundred miles away for a refuel and a check because some components have been brought in the supply ship or something like that. The advantage is they tend to be operating closer to home, so they can get those things, helicopters out from home. But also there's the fact that if they're operating with 4 or 5 of the same ships, or pretty much the same design, together they probably are going to be pooling some of their spare parts. So, the first batch of 52Ds are... how do I put this? They are built around what some call the Chinese Aegis. This is the Type 346A Dragon Eye, as NATO called it, ASA radar system, and their command and control system, which they've been slowly iterating on and developing throughout the past series of ships. This ship is basically the Chinese Navy going, can we bring this all to fruition? It has two different types of close-in weapon system on it. It has the Type 730 forward, and it has the HHQ-10 SAM close-in weapon system aft, which, yes, is basically a Chinese variant of the rolling airframe missile system, which the US likes to use. Again, I would point out, whilst this certainly is a great idea from a cost efficiency engineer's perspective, again, why couldn't they have had two of each? Why not? Let's be honest. It would have been quite useful, and it would have given you some wonderful coverage. Let's say you put the 730s, the Type 730s, the little Dutch goalkeeper variant system, on sponsons on each wing, so they're sticking out the side like little ears. And you've got the lovely HHQ-10 SAM system, one either end on the ship, fore and aft. And then, if one of the missile systems goes down, don't worry, the guns can cover. And if either the guns go down, well, there's two missile systems covering you. That sounds like a great scenario. A very sensible scenario. Of course, it's not been implemented by anyone, so I really shouldn't be giving the Chinese example. But you're probably going to see me talking about this particular bugbear in every video of the modern navies throughout this year. So I warn you, if you watch all of them, you'll probably see variations of this particular rant in every single one, because I personally find it annoying to be told by someone that, well, statistically, these systems are supposed to provide us with 70% operational capability, which means if you have two systems, one fore and aft, you always have one available, and that should be enough. And the temptation to ask people if is it their lives that they're betting is very strong in that moment. I so far have managed to resist the urge, but it's been strong. And this is the historian in the room. Okay? I can't imagine what goes through the service personnel's minds when they're listening to that. And it has a 64-cell system, but you notice they're not a revolver system. Oh no, it is the GJB 5860-2006 system. Now, this particular VLS system is interesting. You see, it supports both hot and cold launches, apparently, using a concentric canister launch approach. This means there are exhaust vents within each launch cell, so it can individually support whether it's going to be a hot system or a cold system. It's also quite a fat VLS. It's 33 inches or 850 millimeters, which, if we consider the Mark 41 VLS, which is the American standard and pretty much the standard for most most NATO navies, is 25, a bit over 25 inches, 63.8 centimeters or 638 millimeters to the 850 millimeters of this. It's also apparently comes in a strike length of roughly 9 meters or roughly 30 foot. A tactical length of 7 meters or 23 foot roughly, and a self-defense length of 3.3 meters or 11 foot. It's an interesting system. It's also not technically the first Chinese VLS. I was going to say Japanese there. Sorry. First Chinese VLS. That would be the HAKJ-16, which was introduced on the Type 54A frigates. That was a hot system. It was also a 26-inch or 650mm whip cell system, and useful assets and useful capability. But the fact that they've got two different VLS systems now operating across their fleet must make it interesting from a missile perspective. It's going to mean there's one set of missiles which can go in one set of one VLS, and efficiently, and other missiles which are designed for the other set efficiently. Especially when you consider that the GJB 5860 2006 is apparently designed for quad packing. Apparently they can quad pack, especially the short-range missiles in the self-defense VLS. Now, why is this all interesting? Because not only do they carry this system, this quite big and spacious for future developments VLS system, quite big and spacious for future developments, definitely, but they carry quite a few of them. They carry 64. And that's a useful number. That is a useful number of cells. Especially when you consider how they've got them laid out. They have 4 sets of 8 forward, lined, well, basically alongside 4 to aft. So they're centre line and centre length. And then there's 4 more positioned back here, if you can see, just forward of the that lovely HHQ-12 close-in weapon system. And they are positioned across deck. So you have 4 across deck there. So they have 2 different orientations going on. Now, there's been some interesting discussions about these over recent years, whether they are all strike length, whether some of them are tactical length, whether all of them are tactical length, whether some of them are self-defense length. Myself, if I was inclined to believe there's any difference, I would think the forward ones were strike length and the aft ones were tactical length, if there is any difference. But I have seen a lot of reading and a lot of discussion about it, and a lot of different documents coming out from China about this. And to an extent, my view is that there is some constructive obfuscation going, but also there is quite a decent chance, when you consider we are talking about a batch 1, a batch 2, a batch 3, and a batch 4, as we're talking about with the DLs, that there could be variation between the different batches. The presumption that they're all the same between all the batches sounds lovely, but let's consider differences between the flights on books, let alone before we start getting into the Royal Navy. You know, there's the classic example I can give you is the Daring class destroyers just come out after World War II, and because they're testing different electric configurations and different power generation systems in terms of voltage on AC versus DC, out of those 8 ships, there will be only 2 ships will have the same electrical system as each other. So there are 4 different electrical setups across a class of 8 ships. And that's when you're just talking about just testing different electrical options. What you can do when you've got different VLSs, different missile sets, different ideas about how these ships are going to fit into the roles. Some of them could be very much orientated at air defense. Some of them can be orientated around, yeah, you're going to do air defense, but you're also there to send large missiles towards enemy ships. Or there could be ones which are going, okay, you basically are whatever carrier we have, you're going to be its last line of defense. You're going to be parked next to it. And you're going to be loaded with a whole load of shorter range missiles. Who knows? And the missiles they do carry, we know they carry them. We know they carry the HHQ-9, that lovely system, which of course was their sort of development of the S-300, which I already discussed. It's a lovely system. That's what they're built around. They're built around this missile. It's sort of fast developing into almost the Chinese equivalent to the Standard missile. And they're also carrying the YJ-18 anti-ship missile, which is a good system. They've got the CGA-10 land attack cruise missile system, and the CY-5 anti-submarine system. So they've got a lot of capabilities going on there. A lot of things which can go into that VLS. 64 cells. But these are not the big boys. These are merely 7,500 tons. And again, Technically, before we get to the DL, I will tell you the reason the DLs are longer is because they have an extended flight deck. And so the ships have had to grow by 5 meters. Roughly. And I will explain when we get there why that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I'll explain that when we get there. But first, the Type 55s. The answer to the question of why the failure of the Zumwalt class has been quite such a hit for the US Navy in terms of their presence and capability is, well, at 13,000 tons fully loaded, these things do have quite a significant presence, despite the fact they are, from a certain perspective, someone has cast a wand over the Type 55D and gone in big and V. But let's consider them. They're armed with a 130mm gun, which 5¼ inch is bigger than a 5-inch, and comes with that status. It's got a big, nice gun. They have the HBJ-11 close-in weapon system, which is still that lovely Type 730, but it's the slightly improved version, the latest version. They have 112 of the GLB 5860 2006 VLS cells. They have an HHQ-10. Did I call them HHQ-12 earlier? HHQ-10. It's a close-in weapon system aft. And they carry the exact same mixture of missiles again as we talked about in the Type 55 F-52D. But these carry 2 helicopters, medium helicopters, so Harbin Z9, Shangi Z18s, or Harbin Z20s. Always nice. Basically, if you don't know, the Harbin Z20 is the thing which looks like a Black Hawk, which the Chinese have. The Shangi Z18 is the one which looks kind of like the Super Frelon. And the Avicopter AC-313, it sort of looks like it's from that design lineage. It really does. It's got, you can tell it's a Chinese design, but it's an interesting one. Also, you must remember the Changzi is, well, the Chang Z18 is the one which was designed to be able to use as an airborne early warning aircraft from Liang. And let's be honest, if you wanted to put airborne warning capability in a task group, which was a surface action group, being able to carry a couple of them, those helicopters, on this ship in the middle of a surface action group, it's going to give it a pretty impressive capability. It's going to give it something which most other surface action groups at this current time don't have. I know we're talking about it with future UAVs and those capabilities, but we haven't got it, most haven't got it yet. Most aren't there yet. So it's something which you can have. And yeah, they are good systems. Now, in terms of power, they are combined gas and gas. And it's important, it's not gas or gas, it's gas and gas. They have a huge number of gas turbines, 4 QC280 gas turbines, and 6 QD50 turbine generators. So 10 of these systems aboard. And that generates a total of, I think, 142 megawatts of power for the ship. So it's got a huge amount of power available to it. Now, some of those are orientated. The propulsion definitely comes from the 4 gas turbines, not the turbo generators. Other gas turbine generator systems. And so probably it's 150,000 shaft horsepower and about 112 megawatts is devoted mainly towards propulsion, but yeah, these ships can go 30 plus knots. They're capable of 5,000 nautical miles at 12 knots. They have a complement in the range of 300. And these ships are certainly capable. Now, again, these are still under construction. Okay, They are still building them. There are plans to reach at least 16 and to equip all of the free fleets with them. But there is also potential that they go further than 16. Currently, they are active with the North Sea Fleet and the South Sea Fleet. I think it's roughly a 50-50 split, with 4 in the North Sea and 4 in the South Sea. And none in the Eastern Fleet at the moment. Now this again makes sense. Look at where the carriers are, look at where the force structure is, look at how the Chinese are building themselves up, and it starts to make sense what these capabilities these ships are bringing in terms of presence, in terms of status. I will also point out you have seen something similar in the growth of Coast Guard ships in the Far East, in that different nations are constructing bigger and bigger Coast Guard ships, and literally it is for peacetime. It's partially for peacetime status of who has the biggest ship to overraw people with, who is able to put the status of mass in the water in an individual ship. And it does also compensate for the fact that you don't have maybe as many escorts and maybe as many ships as you'd like. Having a few, some of these ships carry a lot of missiles is really quite helpful. And the Type 55 carrying 112 of those VLSLs does really matter on that front. And then you consider where they are positioned and how they're positioned, because you can look and see. If you look at this lovely picture, it really does show you exactly where they are and exactly where the slots are, what the slot's doing. There are 8 forward. They are across the deck, but there are 8 of them forward between the gun, the main 130mm gun, and the close-in weapon system gun. And then after the stack, before you get to that sort of between 2 little sort of domes, after you can see there's the remaining VLS systems. Yeah, there's 6 of them. Why? Because 112 is 14 times 8. It's always nice when the things work out mathematically and you can spot the stuff. Now, these are the Chinese Navy has gone from, hello, we used to be in a situation where what we could call on, and going all the way back, was this. And there was no point sending these when this was going on. Now, let's say you don't want to send another carrier battle group or anything, and there's something similar going on, you were in a similar scenario of potentially getting embarrassed. Well, if you send a Type 55, that's a visible capability which is very hard to bully out the way. It's very hard to bully out the way. Because it is physically bigger, and it is going to sit there. And this is the point I tried to make about war versus peace when we're talking about navies. Wartime makes things simpler for navies, harder for armies. Peacetime makes things easier for armies, harder for navies. Because in peacetime, armies go back to the side of their borders, they barely bump into each other. They basically, they can concentrate on exercising training, but they can realistically stay and manage deterrence, but they're not bumping into each other. In wartime, navies can shoot at each other to solve their problems. In peacetime, they have to communicate with each other. They have to come across each other in the middle of the oceans. They have to work out ways to both not concede honor and disrespect. Because, think about it from this way. If you've got 2 carrier battle groups operating in a similar area, you have to make sure the aircraft don't accidentally bump into each other and possibly accidentally end up in a firefight, because that could accidentally lead to war, which neither side wants. Or you have to watch out your ships. You have to also watch out what electronic communications you're giving off in your ships, because you can guarantee, as sensitive as your systems are, so are their systems going to be sensitive and scanning for your electronic emissions, so they have that data for wartime, and also scanning for your acoustic signatures for wartime and all these things. Basically, your life becomes a nightmare for navies in peacetime. Wartime, it's easy. We see threat, we can shoot it. In peacetime, you have to manage it. And realistically, I would love to say we were in a world where it doesn't still matter. But the reality is, in the human world, size does matter. And size gives the impression of strength. It shouldn't. We all know the small person with a gun is just as dangerous as the large person with a gun, in fact possibly more dangerous, because they're a smaller target and therefore potentially harder to hit. Potentially. But also potentially everything's closer together, so if you do hit somewhere you're going to cause more damage. And it's the same with ships, to be honest. But still, if you are picking someone to be to look powerful and impressive with you, you're going to pick the tallest person you can. Again, the British do this with the guards, the tallest guys with the big bearskins on top, bearskin hats. That is to literally look impressive, so everyone's sort of looking when they're walking past. Oh God, I feel small. Look at the shadow it's casting. We've seen this as well when there's been diplomatic visits. Recently, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer went to China, and you saw the Chinese welcoming committee, their troops. Again, they're all very, very tall soldiers. I'm sure they're representative of the average height of China. I'm sure they are. And it's the same with every other nation. You pick the tallest, most impressive, scariest looking troops you can for these things to give the image. And it's the same with warships. With that being said, why is the Type 55 therefore not being the dominant ship being produced, and why are they still producing even more Type 52s? Well, now the Type 52 DLs or DMs, depending on which batch you're in. Now, let's be honest. The Chinese have one problem, and that is mass. They want to be a lot bigger than they currently are. And as lovely as these things are, as capable as they are, they're not going to get you to the mass scenario. These are basically your cruisers to your destroyers, or if we're going to consist with believing that they are all destroyers, because that's what they're being technically called, the Type 82 to the Type 42, as the British were designing for the CVA-1 era, where the 82 was the big destroyer, the big capability, and the 42 was the number increaser. Well, there you go. We had the 55 and the 52, and these have technically been extended by 4 to 5 meters, depending on depending on the length you consider for the actual Type 52, previous Type 52s, because they're even the original batch, there is a slight difference going on in that the first were 156 and next were 157 meters, and these ones are 161 meters. And this is very, very believable for me. Why? Because it goes back to the Type 23 frigate program. My dad was involved in that. He was a naval architect. Yes, my family has a long history of working in the sea and various other interesting things. My dad and mum met working for Lloyd's Register, the international shipping insurance firm, a long, long time ago. And Dad was a naval architect. He worked on the Type 23 frigate program. And when he was working as a naval architect on the program, that's when they discovered that the Type 23 had been designed around the Sea King, which was fine, apart from it was going to be replaced by the Merlin. And the Merlin, well, its wheel arrangement, its undercarriage arrangement, was the opposite way round to the Sea King's. The Sea King's has the heavy wheels forward to take the weight, and a little wheel aft. The Merlin has the heavy wheels aft, and a little wheel forward. And that meant the weighting and ratios and size of the flight deck were not correct and needed to be modified. And they were. There were various strengthening pieces of steel and other things and modifications put in them. This is one of the reasons why when I usually talk about the story to people who served on Type 23s, they'll say, "Oh, is that why there was a piece of steel which suddenly appeared? I kept bashing my head on underneath the hangar on flight deck on some that wasn't on others." Yeah, that's it. That was the fix. I can, that's a situation which happened because literally everyone had thought, well, it's designed for the current medium helicopter. That's pretty much the same weight as the next medium helicopter. That's fine. And no one had thought to check, hang on, the undercarriage is different. So I can honestly understand and accept the idea that they are doing this change literally because they want to increase space for the next generation helicopter. And it's actually listed as the reason is for the Harbin Z20 because it's a bigger helicopter. It's it's the equivalent of the Black Hawk or Seahawk in sort of shape and design, and that's a very honest perspective. However, small issues with this. Just small issues with this. Looking at them, I would say there has been more work done on the stern than just lengthening it. And seeing as they are equipped with a variable depth sonar and a linear towed array sonar, and of course both of those, well, to an extent, are aft and towed and affected by the hull design, and especially the shaping towards the stern. And I do wonder if they took advantage of the need to lengthen it to improve its ASW capabilities, its anti-submarine capabilities, because that is something these destroyers have had. And they have had that pretty much the whole way through. We haven't talked about this as much, but all these destroyers have retained some ASW capability. Whether it's missile systems, ASW missiles, whether it's actual torpedoes. It's interesting to note that the Type 55 has both anti-submarine missiles and torpedoes. These ships are about building up capability. These ships are the ones when you see pictures of, we've got 6 ships in one dry dock being fitted out. The Type 52 DLs are it, or DMs. There's some discussions about this. One of the fun things, again, I find about the sources when you're reading this is, I try and read a lot of the Chinese sources, and I have to admit, I am to an extent naughty. My Chinese is not that brilliant, and my pronunciation of Chinese mostly is traumatized by the fact that I learnt my Chinese originally trying to learn to understand the place names the Royal Navy was giving things in China in the 1920s and 30s, which of course means it's the Royal Navy, let's say the Royal Navy versions of Chinese names of Chinese places. And that then sticks in your head and makes it even worse when you're trying to pronounce them. So I do apologise. My Chinese has been ruined forever by the Royal Navy in the 1920s and 30s. This is the joy of being a historian. It can happen to you. You have to basically relearn the whole language again. And with all this stuff going on through, what I've done a lot of to keep track of modern Chinese kids is I go to the Wikipedia pages, I switch them to the Chinese language, and I go down to the source list, and I click on those, and I go through the sources list, and then I, translate those pages. And please note, if you are looking for publicly available information to give on a public talk, that is a very sensible place to go and start off with as a starting point for your search list. The source list in the actual China, if you're talking about Chinese name, in the Chinese language. So the reason academics don't like people to use Wikipedia and don't allow students to use Wikipedia in essays usually is because there's no author cited for the Wikipedia article, so we don't have anyone to hold to account if it's wrong. Okay? That's it. It could be anyone. But the source lists are often a good a good starting point of information. They're often a very good starting point, and you can use those to go and do a lot of research. And so that is one of the things I do to keep current on the Chinese systems. I also have other websites and other places I go and things I listen to, but that is a good starting point. But one of the things I found, even looking through the Chinese sources, is there is a lot of debate over some of the facts about these vessels. And I think that's because for the Chinese government as a whole, it serves them for there to be a level of mystery going on, for there to be a level of ambiguity. It serves as a deterrent capability, and it serves as something which can allow them to keep, in a way, the information more secure. Because whilst an intelligence agency will know things and will spend a lot of time and effort using satellites and human intelligence and all sorts of sources to track it down and get as much information as they can about these things, if there are enough rumors going around about their capabilities, you have to worry if you've got the right information, if you are sure. It introduces uncertainty into your assessments. And I think that adds to these ships. But overall, this is what the Chinese Navy has evolved into. From a force which, let's be honest, in the 1990s was often the punchline to a joke. It had potential, but it had no funding. It had no capability there, and everyone was looking at them going, sorry to be sorry for you, mate, but you're just not. They have gone from there to this in 30 years, to these capabilities. And realistically, a large chunk of these capabilities are not 30 years old. The 52Ds, they've started being built and churned out in numbers in 2012. This force, a lot of this capability we're talking about, is less than 15 years old. They spent years iterating on designs, learning, developing themselves, and now they are growing. They didn't come from nowhere. It was 15 years of slog to get to the point where they could do that. It was hard labor. Think about it. 1991, the Cold War ends. 1994, they have the Yellow Sea incident. And from there, they're starting to build themselves up. And first, they have 10, 15 years of developing up capabilities, developing up design skills, developing up understanding of what they want from ships, developing up, buying in as much technology as they can to grow their own technological base, investing in their own technological base to actually be able to take advantage of it. Because there's one thing being able to make a missile, there's another thing being able to make that missile on scale. And now, and we're talking about it takes 21 years from the end of the Cold War for these to be laid, for the first batch of Type 52s to be laid down, 2012, for the Type 52s, 052s to be laid down. That's where they've come from. They've come from a navy which was nowhere to this. And yes, are they perfect? I can imagine there are probably going to be people in my comment section going, but the US Navy's building this ship and these ships are better and this and this. And probably you're right. Because when we're looking at the architecture, we're looking at things, when we're looking at some of these designs and stuff, there are bits I'm looking at going, I wouldn't quite do that. I'm not sure if that's quite the right avenue to be going down. I'll see how that develops though. But the thing is, they've evolved this far in that time. The question isn't, are we same as them now? It's a question of, where will they be in 10 years and where will we be in 10 years? And the thing was, and this is the thing that's really caused the trouble for the West, I would argue, when it comes to talking about the Chinese Navy and this whole thing of the rise of China, is it's not so much China's risen as we've cut ourselves down. and China's been building itself up. They looked at themselves and decided they weren't strong enough. We decided we were so strong that we could take a holiday. And the trouble is that holiday turned into the gap year of our lives. And gap years, they just go on and on and on. And unfortunately, now the money's run out and we need to start working again. Or otherwise, we're never going to get out of a gap year. So, I always finish these videos with a question. And the question is this. How do you think the Type 52s are going to evolve? Do you think it's going to be a Type 52E? Do you think they're going to keep being the Type 52Ds till infinitum, or are they going to have a Type 52E? And do you think there's going to be a combining of the Type 55 and 52 lines, or do you think it's going to carry on as it is? And here's another question as a bonus. Do you think the Type 51 is going to return? Because let's be honest, as we've seen throughout the history of it, the 51 has had a habit of popping up intermingled with the 52. So potentially we could see a Type 51 come again. We could. Be interesting to see. I think if they did, my own personal bet on it is that the 51s are built around the surface action groups and basically supporting 55s in surface action groups, and the 52s are orientated around the carrier battle groups with the 55s, and that's their lineage goes with the 55 being basically the leader of the escort group or the surface action group. That would be my instinct of how they might evolve, but we'll see. We will see. I think what the Chinese are increasingly doing, though, is they are going down quite a sensible route, I think it is, of what I would call carization of their ships, where it's kind of like you see with the modern Volvos or Fords, etc., where they have a generic core design and everything is either a stretched or compacted version of that standard design. And so you generate the benefits of mass, the economies of scale, by having the systems built in being as similar and as interchangeable as possible, whilst having the different hulls and different quantities of those systems to reflect different duties. It'll be interesting to see what's coming. Anyway, next week is going to be the pre-World War I, how Japan intimidated an empire. Basically, it's about Japanese torpedo boats. We've gone right back to the beginning again of the torpedo boat destroyer and destroyer story. It's a fun one. The next really modern one is going to be the Type 45s in March. But yeah, well, basically every single period is going to work. Every single sort of session sort of works through from pre-World War I to the post-Cold War, and then back again. That's how I designed the Year of Destroyer, so you can follow the stories through and follow the history through. I hope it's going to be interesting. I think it is. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. If you liked the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Thank you.